of a terror is sealed. I know you've seen it, traveler. You can run from it. You can fight against its grip. But in the end, all remains between hope and oblivion.
The Warlock is here!
Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are going to be going over Warlock. Yes, Acolyte's third mastery. All of that fire damage stuff, all of that curse damage stuff, all of it's going to have support on February 21st when the third mastery finally comes to town. Now, we're going to be going over it in meticulous detail in this video. Now, before we get started, first things off, I want to thank Zizaran for, of course, giving us that intro for the video. He had a very quick turnaround, as I didn't really have that much of a prior notice about it, because it all kind of just happened all at once in a few days. But thank you, Zizaran, nonetheless, for getting that out for me. And of course, as well, thank you for everyone watching the videos at this point. We actually reached 17K subs the other day. That's actually amazing. I never thought I'd ever get past 100. So thank you, everybody. Now, the last thing is, we're going to be talking about Warlock, but I'm only going to be bringing up the most important things about Warlock. We're not going to bring up every single passive node ever, because I'll be here all day. We're going to be talking about the most important parts. If you want everything about Warlock, down below there'll be a bunch of Imgur links about Warlock, and also as well, Maxroll put out a fully finished planner for everything Warlock. So if you really need to see every single tidbit of Warlock, those links will be down below. Now, with all that being said, let's get into the video, shall we? So the first skill that we are going to be talking about is Cthonic Fissure, which is Warlock's mastery skill. So this is going to be a fire damage over time pool on the ground, and it also, of course, shoots out a bunch of spirits, which will then apply Torment, which is a curse that deals 120 flat damage over 3 seconds, and then, of course, has added damage effectiveness of 600%. That's going to be a lot of necrotic damage over time, as you'll see in the next few slides here. The next skill node that I want to showcase is Spirit Gale. So you're going to put down your Cthonic Fissure, and then when tormented enemies die, they have a chance to release a spirit to inflict torment on another enemy within 8 meters. So they're going to bounce between a bunch of enemies, and this will essentially give you 50% more spirits for your clear, which is very important for making this build feel good, right? I think that tormented spirits might actually end up being really good for clear at the very least, right? The next node I want to showcase is Twisted Waves. Torment deals more damage per uncapped necrotic resistance. So we can get 3% more damage per 2% uncapped necrotic resistance. Now, Acolyte is special as they have a very large amount of necrotic res everywhere, wherever you see, especially in the base tree, which means we can turn all of that into juicy more damage, which is wonderful for us, right? Which will end up making Torment deal a lot of extra damage. And of course, we can put it on our gear. We can do a lot of other things with it, as we'll go on later. Now, another thing we can do is Grim Tide. Grim Tide makes it so that Cthonic Fissure and ailments it inflicts deal more necrotic damage per 1% added critical strike multiplier. You can get a very large amount of this. You can get like 400% added critical strike multiplier, which is like 400% more damage for your torment in theory, and also for the damned ailments that you apply. Also, as well, if you force Cthonic Fissure to be necrotic, now I don't believe that there is a node that converts Cthonic Fissure to necrotic, but what you can do is you can run something like, of course, Ghostmaker, which has a large amount of flat necrotic damage flat, and then use that to deal the more damage with this node, which might end up being the play, as this is a lot of more damage. This can be a very large amount of more damage, so we'll see how strong this ends up being. Now, of course, the next node we want to talk about is Return Below. Return Below allows it so that whenever we apply an Infernal Shade on an enemy, and then that enemy gets and that of course that enemy gets tormented, it will pop the Infernal Shade and deal its remaining damage. Now this will turn it into a pseudo Abyssal Echoes effect, where of course we apply Infernal Shades to the enemy, and of course we can deal that damage instantly. Or you can just use it as a buff to make it so you get more frequency of spirits. Either way, you will end up with a lot of extra spirits, and of course there will be definitely ways of automating Infernal Shade as well, so you won't have to actually cast it on the enemy. Now, the next note here is, of course, Chaotic Rupture. Spirits now have a chance to be replaced by a cast of Chaos Bolts that consume a portion of its mana cost and scales with the Chaos Bolt tree. This is really strong because it makes all the spirits, or 60% of them, into Chaos Bolts. And Chaos Bolts are really fun, as we'll get on later in the video. But Chaos Bolts can proc a lot of different things, and you can have a lot of fun with this. Like, you're going to be able to put down a Chthonic Fissure and watch the fireworks happen. What's really cool though is it makes it so it only takes 60% of Chaos Bolt's mana consumption, which is great because, you know, we definitely don't want to be chewing up our entire mana cost. Now, of course, there's not going to be a chance for extra projectiles, but we take what we can get. Being able to put Chthonic Fissure down and have it automate the casting of Chaos Bolts for us is going to be a very, very fun time. Now, the next note I want to highlight is Beacon of Torment. This turns Chthonic Fissure into a very strong buff skill. Spirits now target you instead of enemies, and whenever you are tormented or Torment's duration on you is refreshed, you gain additional spell damage and endurance threshold. This is going to be a very large amount of flat spell damage and endurance threshold. Now, of course, remember, Torment will make you move slower and will also deal a very large amount of damage to you, and will also, of course, increase that damage over time based on the amount of damage you have, because it has added damage effectiveness of 600%, meaning that this node is very, very scary, but you can get a lot of extra spell damage just by tormenting yourself constantly. Now, you can go through other ways where you cleanse yourself constantly with some other means, but you can get a lot of flat damage from this node, which is great. The next node I want to showcase is Rekindled Graves. So this will make it so that fissures can cast zombies every 2 seconds, but it consumes mana cost equal to Volatile Zombie's mana cost. So it's only 70% of Volatile Zombie's mana cost, but there's also a chance for no additional zombies. So if you grab the cooldown node, only a third of them will summon like 10 zombies or however many it is with the node. I think it's like 6 zombies, right? Yeah, it's like no, actually, it's like 5 zombies. Yeah. So 30% of the time, you'll get 5 zombies instead of 1, which will be cool. Now, this is really cool as you can make the zombies also trigger your Infernal Shades for you. You can have a lot of utility with zombies. So overall, zombies are a great thing to be summoning with this kind of setup because you're going to have a lot of utility with them. And the next node that I want to showcase here is Mantle of Flames. Mantle of Flames makes it so that 400% of our ignite chance is applied per second with Fissure. This is really strong as we can stack a bunch of these effects from other sources and have a bunch of our ignite chance per second on enemies. And this is one of them. We can put, of course, Fissure under the target and get a bunch of ignite chance per second, which is great. Now, this is very interesting though, because of the conversion node makes it so that ignite chance is then converted to to bleed chance, right? So there might be synergy with Malin's Hubris, where you convert your bleed chance on your gear into ignite chance. Then that ignite chance is then converted into extra bleed chance with, of course, Chthonic Fissures node that converts, of course, the ignites to bleeds. We will see if that's the case. I'm not entirely sure how that would function, but we will see. Now, the next node I want to showcase is Pyrochasm. Pyrochasm makes it so that you have an initial hit with your Fissure, so you can do a crit Fissure build if you want to. And this is very similar to, of course, Hail Varro's crit node, and there's a lot of nodes that can synergize with this, like, of course, Fissure of Wrath. Fissure of Wrath will make it so that the crit hit will get 1 flat spell damage per 2% ignite chance. Spoilers, you can get a very, very large amount of ignite chance as any class, which with Malin's Hubris, which means, of course, we can get a lot of flat spell damage for our Chthonic Fissure, right? For the Chthonic Fissure crit, anyways, right? Which is wonderful. And another node we want to talk about is, of course, Forbidden Chasm. Forbidden Chasm makes it so we can apply a new curse, Acid Skin, on hit. This will make it so that they have a 20% chance to be crit from any hit, flat amount. This means that it will not apply a percent crit to this, so it's just an added flat amount, right? which is great. That will help you cap crit very quickly, as will the next node that we're going to be showcasing, Acid Bane. Acid Bane makes it so that enemies that are hit with enemies that are applied with acid skin, whenever they're hit, those hits have additional base critical strike chance based on 10% of our global increased poison damage. So we can get like 100%, and that'll be 10% base crit. Now, of course, this is the same way as the last base crit was, where it doesn't work with percent crit. Now, it says your hits against enemies cursed by acid skin. This might mean actually global. I'm not entirely sure, but that might actually be really strong, as you can put down Chthonic Fissure and get like crit capped instantly, especially early on when you're just playing with like really garbage gear. You can easily get crit cap with this, which is fun. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Chthonic Fissure. Let's talk about the next skill, shall we? All right, so the next skill we are going to be talking about is Chaos Bolts. So this skill is going to be available for every Acolyte Mastery, so make sure you keep that in mind as we talk about, of course, these skill nodes. Now, Chaos Bolts is a bunch of projectiles you can shoot out, which deal damage in an area, and those can overlap as well, as long as you have enough area as well, and it seems to be very good, as it seems like as though it's going to be dealing a lot of damage, as we'll see. So the first node I want to talk about is, of course, Exalt in Misery. Exalt in Misery is going to make us deal a very large amount of more damage. We get Frostbite, Bleed, Ignite, and Damned on our gear, and we can deal more damage with Chaos Bolts. And since Chaos Bolts, they hit multiple times, we have multiple chances to, of course, apply these ailments, which then increases our uptime. So we only need a little bit to make, of course, hit Chaos Bolt deal a lot of damage. Now, the next skill node I want to showcase is a Grave for 2. Chaos Bolts deal more damage over time, equal to a portion of your missing health. This is uncapped, and it also scales, of course, off your missing health. So if you have 1,000 missing health, you'll deal about, I think, like 50% more damage. Yeah, and that's very easy to do on any Acolyte, to be honest, as you're going to stack HP, and then you're going to go something like Low Life, of course, or you go Death Seal, and you'll end up with a lot of damage over time for your Chaos Bolts, which is going to be great. There's plenty of ways of abusing this. Now, the next skill node I want to showcase is the Gate. Speaking of Necromancers, hitting your minions with Chaos Bolts grants them any damned, ignite, bleed, or frostbite chance that Chaos Bolts gain from this tree. Now, it can gain like a decent amount, like 100% ailment chance or something like that, and that's integral to making a few minion builds work. So, like for instance, there's like a bunch of bleed stuff that you can do with, of course, the bleed chest. It gives you 140% minion bleed duration, but you don't have that many ways of getting a global minion bleed chance. Well, the Gate is here for you. You can get a bunch of extra bleed chance for our minions and help them apply bleed, which then, of course, we can benefit from all those uniques. And the same thing can be said for frostbite, ignite, and all these other ailment sources as well. So the Gate will definitely be one of the Necromancer's toolbox skills for doing ailment stuff, which is great. Now, the next skill node I want to talk about is, of course, more ailment stuff, Torment of the Red Tundra. So if we're applying a bunch of bleeds with, of course, Chaos Bolts, which, by the way, we can convert it to physical to apply bleeds instead of damn chance, I believe, that will give us a large amount of more physical damage over time per 4% cold res. So we can get like, if we get like 400% cold res, we can get 100% more damage over time for physical, which means, of course, our bleeds are going to hit really hard. And with all of the other nodes in this tree, that will make our Chaos Bolts actually do a very large amount of more damage against enemies, which is great. This is going to be a fun node as well. Next skill node I want to showcase is, of course, Blood Tithe. Chaos Bolts cost less mana, but now consume a portion of your current health and ward on cast. Now, this isn't very good for our Warlock friends or our Necromancer friends, but it's going to be very good for our Death Seal friends over on the Lich Tree, because the minus mana cost is essentially free, as the current health consumption isn't really that much, as, of course, we're going to be Death Seal, so our current health is going to be 30% of our health, and then, of course, if we consume 18% of our current health on cast, we're going to leech that back instantly, because we're going to have less health, which is our current health, which then, of course, leeches back very quickly with the damage that we're dealing. And of course, we don't care about the ward consumption, because, we're Death Seal and we have no ward anyways. So this is going to be very good for all you Lich players out there. Now, the next note I want to talk about is Exacted Libation. This is going to give Rip Blood chance per intelligence for, of course, Chaos Bolts. You only need a decent amount because remember, Chaos Bolts hits multiple times, and this can only apply 3 times per second. Now, of course, that's kind of boo-hoo, but what this does is it essentially doubles the amount of hits you're going to get with base Chaos Bolts, and of course, it'll also, give you even more if you invest into Rip Blood, which investing into Rip Blood per se is going to be very strong, as there's a lot of things you can do with that, because you can get Rip Bloods on kill, you can do all these sorts of things, which will make, of course, this node feel very strong, right? You can proc Rip Bloods, apply even more bleeds or whatever you end up doing, and get even more damage, which is great. Now, the next node we're going to be talking about is Reaper of Mayhem. Chaos Bolts have a chance per dexterity to cause you to attack with Harvest from locations enemy hit, hitting them and enemies around them. This will apply a Harvest attack on hit, and it can only apply 3 times per second. Now, Harvest is a little worse than Rip Blood, but if you're trying to go for a build that procs as many things as possible, right, this Harvest chance is going to be insane because you spec into Harvest, and that's going to be a bunch of extra hits, especially if you're playing like Bleed Chaos Bolts, because Harvest actually has a decent amount of bleed, bleed support in its tree, which will make it so that we get even more hits. Now, of course, we only need a decent amount of dexterity to apply, of course, the harvests every second, because we're hitting multiple times with each Chaos Bolt, which will make up for the fact that, we can only get so much percent chance from our dexterity. Now, the next skill node I want to showcase is, of course, Chthonic Aura. So I believe Chaos Bolt starts out with 3 projectiles first. Don't quote me if I'm wrong. And then, of course, you can get 4 extra projectiles from the tree. Now, it starts out with a 10 base mana cost, and then you can get 20 extra mana costs here, so we can get up to 7 projectiles. And, of course, we can get that minus mana cost, like I showed earlier, to help sustain with the mana, or you can grab some mana refund on the tree that I wasn't showcasing here because the nodes aren't very interesting. But essentially, this is going to be a lot of extra damage because, of course, more hits equals more ailments or more crits and more casts, right? Which is great. So this node is going to definitely be very strong once we get a bunch of projectiles, especially for your Lich, because you get that negative 60% mana cost for free. So this is just free projectiles for any Lich build that's using Chaos Bolts, which is cool. Now, the next node I want to showcase is Volatile Kindling. Chaos Bolts hitting one of your volatile zombies causes it to instantly explode and dealing more damage and, of course, more in a larger area, right? Which is really cool. Now, this alone wouldn't be that good, right? But thankfully, we have the node after it, Sudden Putrescence. So this will make it so we can deal 75% more damage with our zombie explosion and have 120% area. So all of these combined means if we hit our zombies with, of course, our Chaos Bolt, we're going to be dealing a very large amount of damage with our zombies, which is great. And essentially, it'll make it so that every single time we kill a zombie, we can deal even more damage with that zombie. We can get even more investments. And you can actually use this with, of course, the gate node, which will give you even more ailment chance, which for our zombies, because we're always going to be hitting our zombies with the Chaos Bolts to proc them, right? So all of that combined means that we can end up doing a very large amount of damage with this. Like I said, Chaos Bolt is not only a Warlock skill, it is a Necromancer skill as well, thanks to all these nodes that synergize with it very well. Now, the next node I want to showcase is Revolution, speaking of Necromancer. Whenever mana is consumed by Mana Anarchy, so essentially you can consume mana to a chance to consume mana, which will give you, of course, more damage for Chthonic Bolts, but with Revolution, it makes it so that whenever you consume that mana, right, your minions will gain additional flat spell damage based on your maximum mana and gain cast speed. Now, I don't know if it stacks, but since it lasts 13 seconds, I'm pretty sure that it will stack, so you can scale your own cast speed, get a bunch of max mana, and give our minions a bunch of flat added spell damage, which is insane because there's a lot of things you can do with that. That's going to give us a lot of damage for our minions, right? And that's pretty much it for that node. Now, the next node I want to showcase is, of course, Chains of the Betrayer. What this is going to do is it's going to take those 7 projectiles, right, and then make it into a really, really, really big projectile, which means, of course, we can hit a bunch of enemies at once. So if you ever wanted to play like Magma Orb from Path of Exile or something like that, this is as close as you're going to get because you're going to do a very large bolt, and I look forward to actually utilizing this. Now, of course, it won't make the single target better for a Chthonic Fissure, but it will make the clear better because you apply one really big AoE, which will kill a bunch of trash at once, which I'm looking forward to utilizing. I think this node is going to be fun. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be good, but it's definitely going to be fun, and I'm going to use it. And that's pretty much it for Chaos Bolts here. All right, so the next skill we're going to be talking about is Profane Veil. So this is a defensive skill for, of course, Warlock that you can channel, and whenever you're channeling it, you will dodge every hit. You'll have a 100% chance to dodge. Now, of course, you can still take damage from dots and other things, but you will dodge hits, which makes you nigh immortal for the most part. Now, of course, this only has a 2-second duration beginning, and its cooldown does not recover during its use, which it has like a 10-second duration at, of course, base. Now, there's a lot of ways of utilizing this skill and abusing it and changing it. So the first node we're going to showcase is, of course, Heretic's Flame. This will make it so that Profane Veil turns into a fire skill and gets ignite chance per second, of course, right? Which is great. Then the next skill that will synergize with this is Hellfire. While in Profane Veil, you gain a percentage of your damned, bleed, poison, slow, and ignite chance on hit as chance to ignite chance per hit for a Profane form. This means if you get bleed chance, poison, slow, like whatever, all of that will give you ignite chance, 300% multiplied. So if you have like 1,000% chance to apply all these things, you'll have like 30 ignites per second, which can end up being a lot of damage very quickly for a skill like this. Now, the next one we'll showcase is Propane Form. You move faster equal to a portion of your chance to ignite on hit up to a maximum, but Profane Veil has a shorter duration per chance to ignite on hit to a maximum. So essentially, the idea here is we have less duration with, of course, Profane Veil, but we have a lot more movement speed, and a lot more movement speed this will be. This might actually end up being one of the best ways of speed clearing monoliths, as we can get a ridiculous amount of movement speed. We're going to be able to just zoom with this, which will be very fun. Now, of course, the next node we're going to talk about is Seance. Seance will make it so that, of course, while a wandering spirit is revealed inside Profane Veil's area, right, the spirit will deal more damage, and it will also have do it in a larger area, which will increase the overlap. So for instance, if we're Profane Veiling on top, of course, an enemy, those spirits will actually deal more damage in an area, right? And of course, what we could do is we could hop out of Profane Form eventually, right? And then we can use Drain Life, which will make it so that our spirits last indefinitely. So we can keep these spirits and deal damage with them, which will be interesting. Wandering Spirits Warlock might actually end up being a thing. I'm pretty excited for that specifically. Now, of course, next skill node here. Profane Instruments. This is essentially your jack of all trades node. You can get area with a staff, damage with a wand, duration with a scepter. Spoilers, that's probably the best one. And then, of course, movement speed with a dagger. That might actually be fun. And then kill threshold with an axe. Now, the main nodes that we really care about are mainly the duration with a scepter, because the longer we stay in Profane Form, the longer that we can not take damage, and it will increase the uptime of Profane Form, which is great. Now, of course, that kill threshold with an axe is very interesting. That's a decent 21% kill threshold, although I'm not entirely sure if you'll ever use an axe on a Warlock. We'll see. And the area with the staff is pretty cool if you're trying to clear with it. But of course, damage with the wand will end up being the probably go-to if you're trying to deal more damage, right? Now, the next node we'll talk about is Stream of Profanity. So if Profane Veil is on cooldown, we can reduce the cooldown based on the amount of curses we cast. So we can spam either Spirit Plague, Bone Curse, whatever we do. And that will end up making it so that we can cast Profane Veil faster. Quacker. It'll make it faster. This will be really good for that Propane Form subversion, because what we'll do is we'll move a bunch, then cast Spirit Plague a bunch, then we'll Propane Form again. So all of this combined means that we can keep Profane Form up a lot more often. And if you're playing a Profane Form specific build, right, you'll end up with a lot of extra uptime thanks to this node. Now, the next node is Vampiric Pool. Profane's Veil area now consumes your minions, and consuming minions this way grants you ward equal to the portion of their maximum health, as well as extending remaining duration by a small amount. So of course we can consume 10 minions, which will increase the duration of Profane Veil from 2 seconds to 7 seconds. That is an insane amount. We can utilize this with, of course, all the other nodes aforementioned, or we can just use it to have even more defenses and gain a bunch of ward for free, which is cool, right? Now, the next note here is Apocalypse. You now summon volatile zombies when you exit Profane form, equal to the number of minions consumed up to a maximum from the node here. So we get up to 5 volatile zombies on cast, and they'll actually get more damage per int and more area per int. Although I'm not entirely sure if this will be useful because we're not on Necromancer, but we'll have to see, right? But zombies, of course, have a lot of utility, so this will definitely be useful for the most part. Now, the next note here is Omnivore. The benefits from the Vampiric Pool and Apocalypse now triggers when you kill enemies with it with a Profane Veil, which is really strong because we're going to be killing a lot of stuff with this if we focus it on damage, right? Now, the next node we'll talk about is, of course, Profane Orbs. This will make it so that we shoot out a bunch of orbs. Shoot out a bunch of orbs when we're in profane form, and the next node will actually make it so that we actually get more orbs, which is really cool. We actually get a bunch of profane form orb frequency based on our cast speed for curses. Now, of course, I believe this will just use generic curse cast speed, then curse cast speed. Like it'll just use generic cast speed and also add the curse cast speed on top of that, which means we can get a very large amount of profane orbs very quickly, as we'll go from about 1 second to like maybe 3 orbs per second, which will be cool. Now, the next node we can talk about is the last node that's interesting is Lake of Blood. Lake of Blood turns necrotic damage to physical damage over time, of course, and will also deal more damage based on our bleed chance. This might end up being the main way of applying like normal profane damage over time veil, like with spell damage, as this is the main multiplier in the tree. Now, of course, you can go ignite profane veil, but that won't be like fire damage over time profane veil, right? So this node will actually end up being very good. If you end up going physical. And I really like the name, and that's why I'm showcasing it here. All right, let's talk about the next skill, shall we? All right, so we're not going to talk about Soul Feast too much. I'm sorry for the brevity of this, but Soul Feast got reworked and put at the top of Warlock, but it didn't change all that much. So if you remember the old Soul Feast, the new Soul Feast is going to be very similar. So let's get into that real quick, shall we? So one of the new nodes, or newly changed nodes, is Toxic Craving. This used to give 6% armor per stack, but now it's 2% more armor per stack. So what this will do is it will benefit you for stacking percent increased armor on your gear, but it punishes the builds that did not use percent increased armor at all. So it's technically a nerf for most situations, but this node allowed you to get cap on armor like instantly. So it's completely okay for this to get nerfed. This definitely deserved it. And now it feels significantly more balanced before. And now I actually feel like I want to use it instead of like abusing it, right? The next node that got changed was they changed a little bit of how Soul Feast gets their ward. So now you get ward gained per intelligence instead. This can actually give you like a decent amount of ward gain on hit. So you can get a decent amount of ward with this, which is cool. Now, this additional amount of ward gained is really cool because we can also do stuff where you get even more ward. Like for instance, Soul Feast costs less mana and has a chance based on your current mana to draw back greater soul fragments, which grant more ward, right? So this will give you about 150% more ward with max points into this, and you get 1% chance per 10 current mana. So if you like 200 mana, you'll have a 20% chance, and so on and so forth. And also as well, Soul Feast will have less mana costs, which is great. And this will synergize with the next node here. Soul fragments from rares and bosses grant significantly more ward. So we get even more ward, which is great, right? On bosses specifically. And the next node here, this is where it all pays off. Usurp. Soul fragments from rare or boss enemies also grant mana. Modifiers to the amount of ward gained granted from soul fragments also apply to the amount of mana. So for instance, all of those other nodes that give you more ward and more all that, right? That will apply to the mana gained on bosses and stuff, right? But this is also a downside as well. As we'll move on here, there's also Grim Affliction, which gives us more damage with Soul Feast, but it reduces the ward gain, which this would also reduce the mana gained. So as you can tell, it's kind of a balancing act, right? Now, of course, one of the biggest reworks that we've had is they changed the old skill node, which is like gave you a bunch of repeats and made it cost a bunch of mana. Instead of that, now we just have what is it called? Unleash from Path of Exile built directly into the skill. So now you can get like a 3 casts of soul feast very easily, which is great. It means that you cast it like 4 times every few seconds instead of like 6 times, but your entire mana bar is gone. So I really like this change. This change will make Soul Feast a lot more fun to play with in monoliths and stuff like that. Now it definitely nerfs it for single target, but like it's fine. It's like it'll live, right? Now, the last node we'll talk about that was reworked was Incision. So it made it so that after the bleed chance, like the physical conversion, now we get physical ailment damage per 100 missing health, 1% per point. So we can get a decent amount of more damage with bleed with Soul Feast. Now the problem is it's Soul Feast and it only hits like once per, and it also doesn't have that many more damage modifiers. So I'm not entirely sure if Soul Feast is actually going to be good in the next patch, but we'll see. We'll mess around with it. But I definitely think that the rework definitely did it a little dirty here or there. But we'll look into it more at a later date. If you don't like the brevity that I talked to the skill in, you can go down below in the description and get the link for the skill tree yourself and look at all the nodes. But let me tell you, it's essentially just old Soul Feast with some new paint. So the next skill we're going to be talking about is Ghostflame. It is a fire necrotic spell damage over time channeling skill, and it has 600% added damage effectiveness. That is a lot, guys. And you also have a high mana cost for channeling, but we'll get into why that is in a moment. Now, of course, we have the first node, Disdain, which makes it so we can take less damage from enemies. That's very good whenever you're standing still to apply damage, which I'm pretty happy with. And the next node here is Arteries of Malice. This is great as it converts everything to physical, so it scales off of one damage type, right? And then eventually we can turn the damned and ignite into bleed conversion, right? Because we can get our bleed chance per second with Phantom Transfusion as bleed chance for, of course, Ghostflame and apply a bunch of bleeds per second, which is great, right? So we can play bleed Ghostflame. Now there's a bunch of notes after this, like Feast of Bones, which makes it so that we cast a bunch of Marrow Shards when we're channeling Ghostflame. This is really cool because this makes it so that we can essentially cast Marrow Shards in a different way other than self-casting them. Because I'll be honest, Marrow Shards kind of sucks for targeting, but if we can auto-target with Feast of Bones here, it's a lot more entertaining. And this will be really good on the bleed Ghostflame setup because our bleed chance global will also apply to, of course, our Marrow Shards. So we can get a bunch of bleeds for free. And then the next node here, Fuel of Anguish, which will increase, of course, the Marrow Shards frequency. So we can get like, I think like 2 Marrow Shards per second on the same target, which is a lot of extra damage. The next node here is Flames of Misery. It makes it so that our Ignite and Damn chance per second is applied to Ghostflame instead, up to 200% for Ignite and then 300% for Damned. That's important because we get significantly less Damn chance than we do get Ignite chance, so it's nice that they realized that and made sure the nodes balances accordingly. Of course, this Ignite chance per second is really good, right? We can play Ignite Ghostflame if we wanted, or Damned Ghostflame if we wanted. Now, the next node after that is Occult Embers, which gives us Ignite duration and Damn duration per intelligence. We can get 300% increased, 200% increased duration with our Ignite and Damned. This is absolutely bonkers, and this is the main reason to play Ailment Ghostflame, because you can stack like 100 int and get a very large amount of more damage, which is great. Now, the next node here is going to be Memorial Flames. We can actually channel it and then leave it down on the ground for about a few seconds here, which is kind of cool, right? We can get up to 2.5 seconds detached duration normally, but then we can also grab Unending Ruin, which will make it so that we have a higher mana cost, but it makes it so that we can increase the duration significantly, so up to about like 7 seconds, which means the Ghost Flame will keep working while we're running around and doing other things, right? Then the next node after that, actually, there's a node after that will make it so that the Ghost Flame can actually move around and kill things as well, which is kind of cool, right? Now, the next node we're talking about is Spirit Kindling. Spirit Kindling makes it so that we can apply our Ignite chance per hit, give our minions melee attack speed and movement speed for Wraiths, Specters, and Revenants, meaning that if we have a bunch of Wraiths down, we can make them, of course, get all of our Ignite chance, which is great. Now, of course, I'm not entirely sure if this node is good per se, but it's very cool. It's a very interesting thing to have in the Necromancer toolbox. We'll see if it actually feels good or not. And that's pretty much it for Ghostflame. There's a lot of other nodes on the tree, but those are the ones that are the most interesting. Now, let's talk about the passive tree, shall we? All right, now we're going to be going into the Warlock passive tree. Now, the full tree will be down below in an Imgur link, but I'm just simply going to talk about a few of the nodes that caught my eye specifically. So the first node is Occultist Mind, where it makes it so that you get mana based on your intelligence. This is very good, as there have been a lot of things that they've added that base their damage on your mana for Acolyte, but we don't really have that many things to give us mana. So thankfully, with this node, we finally have a way of synergizing, because we can get a very large amount of intelligence as an Acolyte, like well over 100 intelligence, which means that's 100 flat mana for all of your mana-based things, like, of course, I think specifically Hungering Souls has it. I think Summon Skeletal Mage has it. There's a few other skills that has it, but essentially mana equals good on Acolyte for a lot of different reasons. Now, the next one we'll talk about is Cauldron of Blood. So I'm not entirely sure what actually Bleed Overload does. I can't remember. But what it does when you proc it is it will cast Rip Blood up to 5 enemies every single time you proc it. So you need to cast a physical skill, and enemies within 15 meters have a combined 25 or more stacks of bleed. You cast Rip Blood it up to 5 nearby enemies. And I'm pretty sure there's no cap to this. There's no cooldown or anything like that. So if you apply a bunch of bleeds constantly, you can get a bunch of Rip Bloods for free. Now, quote me if I'm wrong, by the way. I'm not entirely sure. Now, of course, the next node actually will get 1 Rip Blood cast per second while we have Bleed Overload, which is also cool, right? Because this means that, of course, we can get a lot of automation going off. Now, the next node we'll talk about is Imperishable. Now, Imperishable will give us Ward Decay Threshold per 1% of Necrotic Res. This is very interesting, as Ward Decay Threshold, essentially what it does is, in the calculation for ward decay, what it will do is it will rest your 0 number for your ward, like your settling ward, up higher based on your ward decay threshold. So for instance, if I have no ward, my ward 0 is at 0%, right? But if I have like 200 threshold, that is pushed up to 200, meaning that I will not go below 200, and that extra 200 will also give us more benefits based on the ward calculation, which is cool. So essentially, TLDR, ward decay threshold equals more ward, more good, right? And we have a lot of necrotic res stacking on Acolyte in general, so this will be really cool, especially with the new helmet bone, well, the newly reworked Bone Claimer Barbrute, which gives you a very large amount of ward per second based on necrotic resistance. So we can stack as much necrotic resistance everywhere, and not only get the damage from some other skills, we also get, of course, the ward decay threshold, like from here. So there's a lot of benefits for this, right? The next node we'll talk about is Vile Tide, which is the Poison Overload. So we get 4% poison penetration per stack on the poison of the target, up to 100 stacks. So we can get 400 poison penetration from Poison Overload. That is an insane amount of poison damage. This will maybe poisons back. We'll see if poison's actually back or not. And you also, of course, whenever you trigger Poison Overload, you also get a Defiling Nova, which expands outward, poisoning enemies hits. So it's like an extra AoE. Now, for Defiling Nova specifically, if you read it, your poison chance applies at 500% of its normal value for Defiling Nova. So that'll be interesting. So if you have like 500% chance to apply poison, you'll apply 25 poison with Defiling Nova. So if this trigger, right, with this node, if we get to 25 stacks of poison easily, right, in theory, we might actually be able to constantly cast this Defiling Nova, which will end up with a large amount of poisons. And of course, we get the Poison Overload stuff. So this will be very, very, very strong. Now, the next note here is Encroaching Darkness. When you directly cast a curse skill, you also afflict a number of enemies around the target location with English. Now, English is that curse that we talked about in the last episode, where, of course, whenever enemies died nearby, all the other enemies that are afflicted by English will take necrotic damage flat. And of course, this will scale with your spell damage and stuff like that, and it'll keep triggering as you keep killing things, right? And the idea here is we just use something like Spirit Plague to apply a bunch of Englishes nearby, and then, of course, as they take damage and they die, they'll apply even more necrotic damage to everything else. So in theory, we can kind of get a lot of free clear, or we can use something like Bone Curse and get the explosions and the Bone Curse procs. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this, but English definitely might have some usage for clearing monoliths at the very least, right? This is an interesting node. The next node I want to talk about is Chains of Ruin. So, Chains of Ruin can give us a damned overload. So we get 1% more damn damage per 2% missing health on you and 2% missing health on the target. So if we're missing health, we deal more damage, and the enemy is missing health, we also deal more damage to them, which is really cool as it benefits us for, of course, being low life while also making the enemy take more damage. Now, with Damned Overload, we can chain enemies to the ground. We can chain up to, I think, where is it? No, it's chained all damned enemies to the ground. So we chain them all to the ground and they can't move, which is cool because roots are cool. And that makes it so that, you can root enemies and kill them quicker, which is cool. Now, the next node here, Infernal Lash here. Infernal Lash gives us Ignite Overload. Ignite Overload gives us 1% more fire damage. This is global, by the way. 2 ignited enemies per 20% global ignite chance for fire skills. So, for instance, if you're doing a fire crit setup or you're doing a fire spell damage over time setup, you can actually invest into global ignite chance or, of course, more damage with those skills. Or you could, of course, just play ignite chance as well. Now, you can also consume ignites to apply flame whips, which will just, ignite things for you and stuff like that. We get like 3 per time we trigger it. So we get like 3 extra hits. This one's a little bit more lackluster, but Ignite Overload completely makes up for that because it does so much more damage, which is great. Now, the next node I want to talk about is the Ashen one. So when you gain Ignite Overload or Damned Overload, all ignited and damned enemies within 15 meters are inflicted with Witchfire for 12 seconds. Now, if you don't know what Witchfire does, it has a massive 300 fire damage and 300 necrotic damage over 12 seconds. And it is an ailment. It's an ailment as well, right? And it cannot stack. So it does 600 base damage per second, right? And of course, the damned and all that will work for it, right? Which is cool, or at least necrotic damage over time, right? And we'll apply Witchfire to everything within 15 meters, as long as they're ignited or damned. And the next note here, we not only get the hit spread Witchfire during overloads, we also get a very large amount of more damage with Witchfire here. So we can we get 10% more damage with Witchfire, Witchfire fire damage per global ignite chance, and then 30% more based on your damned. So you can get a very, very, very large amount of more damage with Witchfire, which might end up being a build all of its own, where you just play Witchfire and you proc it constantly. So we'll see how that goes. That's definitely one of my more favorite passives from the entire skill tree. We'll see how it works, but that's going to be it for the passive tree. All right, so that's going to be it for the Warlock video. If you've been here the entire time, well, Pog, thank you for watching the entire video. If you haven't already, I would heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. Now, with all that being said, I'm off to go theorize a bunch of Warlock builds. Bye!